We are going to follow the money.
Everything you need to know can be understood with this simple phrase: follow the money. And believe me, that's what's happening.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to College Sports Follow the Money, an all-new podcast diving into the critical issues surrounding the big business of college sports. I'm Andrew Monaco, joined by former president of Texas A&M University and former chancellor at the University of Missouri, Dr. Bowen Loftin, and former vice president and general manager of Fox Sports Southwest, Jon Heidtke. From NIL to the transfer portal and opt-outs, to the college football playoff, conference realignment, and more, we tackle the key issues facing college athletics today and into the future.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money! He's the loudest black man!
We welcome you to episode 62 of College Sports Follow the Money. We're going to be talking about NBA TV. We're going to be talking about minor league baseball. How's that affect college sports? I promise we'll all tie it together, as well as conference media days, including the Big 12, which just wrapped up, and some more rumors alongside Dr. Bowen Loftin with Jon Heidtke. I'm Andrew Monaco. We are so glad that you are with us. Howdy, gentlemen.
Howdy.
Howdy.
One of us is in College Station. I just want to say that. Someone's got to hold down the fort. No, I appreciate y'all. And this is that time of year where people like to get away because we get right back into the grind for sure. But it doesn't matter if we're home, if we're away. College sports world always turns. Dr. Loftin, let's begin in the Big 12, where we have talked time and again about conferences and who will end up where. It always seems like it's musical chairs, and the music never seems to stop. Coming out of what Commissioner Brett Yormark has said, he has labeled the Big 12 the third best conference, whether other conferences believe that or not. And one of the reasons why I think he said that was there's some rumblings. Florida State and Clemson might be posturing. Am I using the right words for all of this?
I think so. Just before I get into that, let me say a few things about me at the moment here. I'm in Colorado as I speak to you guys today. My son lives in Denver. I left Texas to avoid 100-degree weather, which I encountered in Denver. So no wind there, but I'm up in Loveland right now and spent most of the day at Rocky Mountain National Park, where it was much nicer temperature-wise. And we'll stay in this area for a few more days before heading back to Texas. I failed to pack a bow tie. And so I'm in the home of a dear friend. His name is G. Harvey Dunn III, Esquire, and his lovely wife, Sandra, who are long-time friends here. And they're hosting me today for my podcast site. And they loaned me a bow tie, which is a strap-on. I have to confess, I don't usually wear those, but when you have to, you have to, okay? So that's my introduction here. Andrew is right. We had some interesting statements made at media days for the Big 12. Yormark really, I think, performed well, okay? He strutted the stage and made the best of it. Besides what you said, Andrew, he also called his conference the deepest conference in the USA, quote unquote, deepest conference in the USA. And I want you two guys to think about that. And
I don't know if
really
it's the deepest.
reflects.
It's definitely the widest.
Yeah.
Well, the Big 12, could argue about widest right now more than the Big 12 could. But my point is that that went on, and he has done two things already, which we've talked about here. He's been exploring a sponsorship for the naming rights to the Big 12 conference. He's been exploring private equity investments into the Big 12. But how do you really make that money work? And rumors this week have begun to emerge about Florida State and Clemson toying with the idea of joining the Big 12. Now, the question in my mind is that simply a teaser to try to get the Big 10 and the SEC off the dime and really be more serious about overtures to them, or is it real? And is there enough money? Right now, a Big 12 school gets what about, John, about less than $40 million per year, and we're talking around 70 for the SEC and Big Ten schools. That's a huge gap. 40 million a school is a pretty darn big gap to bridge. And you have any thoughts about how that might work if we were looking at an FSU Clemson addition to that conference vis-a-vis them joining the Big Ten or the SEC?
Well, I think, again, if you're Clemson and Florida State, you're kicking all the tires everywhere around to try to make sure you understand what's going on where. And again, the nature of this business that we're living right now, things are changing pretty quickly and dramatically. So it doesn't surprise me that there's backdoor channels going on through there. I doubt that, that Yormark's directly talking to Florida State about these opportunities. They're probably, again, back channel conversations that, again, private equity, third-party groups could be having right now and saying, if this were to happen, would you be willing to do this? And one of the reasons why I think, again, we've talked on the podcast before, the private equity guys are circling around here. They see there's still a lot of probably underutilized or exposed value in the media rights of this process. And so I think, again, one of the things that the Big 10 or the Big 12 has now is, I mean, and certainly if you look at a roster, it's got depth because what are we, 20 schools now? I don't even know with everybody that's coming.
20 is a sort of number they're at right now, yes.
Yeah. And so if you think about that, you're going to probably have 10 are playing at a higher level and 10 maybe not playing. So it's a high level. So do they start to create a two-tiered model in their world? And I think that part goes to the conversation of, is that start to talking about, distribution, of the revenue that maybe the teams that are performing at the higher level are going to get a larger share of that versus teams who are not performing. So I think all of those conversations could give, a school, like if they're pitching it right, to say a Florida State or a Clemson, and if you win at football and you're going to get more money than Kansas State is, for argument's sake. So it doesn't surprise me that these things are happening, but you do have a commissioner that's kind of, he's certainly not a traditional college commissioner in terms of his, his path to that chair. So he's going to be looking at making deals. He's going to be looking to see, how do we grow in this space? And again, they're playing from a hand that, that those schools, are probably welcoming him to see what new kind of things could he strike and bring to the table. Going to Vegas. I mean, if you watch any of the press conference, they had a great little logo. I think Totino's Pizza was one of their sponsors there. They had, it was he's doing things. He's a marketer. They're doing things like a marketing, that does. So again, and I think again they built up Vegas. They do things there. So it doesn't surprise me that conference will probably be on the leading edge or the cutting edge of new ideas here. If you look at the old, go back to the old days, Andrew Monaco is probably too young for this, but when the NBA and the ABA were out there, what the things that the ABA did to finally get merged with the NBA. And then a lot of the marketing things that the ABA did became part of the NBA. So, again, looking back at the history of sports, what he's doing right now is kind of trying to say, look, we don't have the luxury of being the Big 10 or the SEC. So what can we do to draw attention to ourselves, do some new things that the marketplace, is not probably hasn't embraced yet, but could very well embrace it. So again, I tip my hat to him in terms of what he's trying to do and to bring attention to that conference. And I think, again, losing Texas and Oklahoma, that's a blow. And he's got to now try to fill that void. I think he's doing some things to help bring attention to the conference. And so they probably do have the best basketball league in the country if you look at it. From a depth perspective, I saw. I got, this was funny. Somebody asked me, said, who's going to win the Big 10 or the Big 12 this year? And I'm starting, okay, I think K-State's pretty good. And then I'm going like, well, okay, Tech might, and he goes, well, no, that's not even the number one vote yet. And I'm going down the list. And finally goes, it's Utah. I forgot that Utah was joining the league this year. So again, I think, if sports guys like me have a hard time keeping tabs of who's all on that roster, I think, again, what he's doing to try to bring attention to it is probably not necessarily bad for what they're trying to accomplish.
John, you brought up the basketball there. He also mentioned that in the future, possibly breaking up the football media deal and the basketball media deal. That would be brand new for conferences. Usually they've been tied together, have they not?
They have. But if you look at it, their football may not be as valuable as it is to the SEC and the Big Ten, but their basketball will probably beat both of those conferences right now. So, and if you look at what the NCAA just did, in terms of their new NCAA championship rights agreement, that I'm not saying that that's what you should do, but that's where private equity guys are whispering in his ear, said, if you break this off and we can stream these games, and these are the best college basketball teams playing, there's going to be somebody who has interest in that. So I think for his perspective to, again, start to float those ideas out there, probably not a necessarily a bad thing, because again, those P&E guys are going to be able to bring other players into the mix that are going to be not the traditional players that we're seeing today. And so I think that's something that he's looking to do and try to, again, certainly just keep that out in the thought process of these different, thought leaders out there and see where it all ends up at the end of the day.
And because
You
he
ring a
has
bell
some,
there, John, with the comment you just made. I just looked at the NWSL, and they are up 42% in terms of streaming this year compared to last year. That's a huge jump. They've already passed 1 million viewers at this point, halfway through their season, and they're on top of a $240 million 4-year deal they cut. So, again, trickle down we'll come to later on, Andrew, and that's an important conversation today to have. But I see things happening out there with these deals that are enabling people to go out and monetize this content. And in basketball, it's certainly a popular sport. The NBA, drives the train. Obviously, we'll come to that in a moment. But I can see this becoming a real strategy. Let's break out the basketball rights. Let's market those to the hilt and see what kind of money we can get, because the Big 12 needs the money. They're going to keep teams in. They're going to have the money. And
Fox just did a deal with the Big East, which is predominantly a basketball conference. So again, and that's because of primarily the success of UConn and Villanova. And again, the Big 12 is certainly, has probably, I would say, a deeper basketball conference in the Big East. So look at those numbers, and could that translate into something that's going to create more value for the Big 12?
And the Big East is Fox, NBC, Peacock, Turner, Max is now part of it. I was going to ask you, Jon, Yormark has some time before the rights ends. We don't know what it's going to be in the next 6 years or so, but I like your point. He's kind of put everybody on notice. If we can do this, kind of consolidates his position, makes it stronger, doesn't it?
As he famously said in his opening press conference a year ago, the Big 12 were open for business. So I think, again, that continues to carry that theme on. And again, that he's got the content now to back it up, particularly at the basketball level.
I mentioned off the top about the NBA TV deal, where I believe it's just a couple more days. Turner may have an opportunity to match the deal. NBC, though, will take over along with ESPN, ABC, and Amazon. And Dr. Loftin, you talked about that, saying, does it affect the NCAA, the NCAA's agreement with Turner and CBS for right now? I'm not sure it affects it so much immediately. But it's fascinating, Dr. Loftin, because when you say that, we kind of start thinking, where do all the tentacles reach and how does it affect one another, whether it is a pro league and a college league, because that's where some of all this media is going.
We're talking college sports typically here, but you can't ignore the fact that we're sitting in a context. And so often we see things happening with the pros in terms of their money, even their rules that trickle down to college. And trickle down economics has a history, obviously, I won't delve into here, but think about a $76 billion with a B dollar package for the NBA for 11 years. That's a lot of money, and it escalates during the contract period so that they can pay players more and more as each year goes by, and the competition ramps up for the paycheck. So I see that as a leader in terms of what can be done, that provides an example to the NCAA and perhaps others like the Big 12 trying to negotiate a media rights deal just for basketball. You can't ignore the NBA and the worth they have and how they've structured their relationships with the media, and then use that as a possible model for this trickle down to the college level. And I want to hear Jon's thoughts about this, because I think Jon's seen this over a long period of time, and he knows a lot about how pro deals begin to impact college deals.
Yeah, I think, again, if you looked at this 12 months ago and somebody said if you were the NBA and you were going to get maybe double what your rights fees were, they would have probably been high-fiving each other. And the result of this new deal, it's close to triple what their old deal was. So I think they've come out very, very well at it. Again, a couple of different things there. I mean, the NBA really is pushing that global, the globalization. The last 4 or 5 MVPs have all been internationally born players. The league's popularity, basketball is a sport that's growing globally. So, and I think the streaming world now can again capitalize on that world with one-stop shopping. So I think a lot of those things, the in-season tournament, all these things that they're trying to create some things from European leagues that have had success there. So I think they truly have probably the best U.S. based sport to really take advantage of this globalization process. And I think you saw some of that value exploited in this most recent round of negotiations, particularly in light with what Amazon coming to the table on it and having games on Peacock and some of these things that these people are looking to do. So I tip my hat to Bill Koenig and the guys over there for the work that they did to make this happen. But again, I think, and again, there's still a couple of wrinkles out there, as Andrew alluded to in the open. But I do think, again, what it's done is, and I looked at some of the notes today, and it's interesting about the number of nights you're going to be able to see NBA basketball on during the course of the season. Roughly it used to be you had an occasional game on the weekend on Sunday on the NBA, and then you had, Turner was Thursday and ESPN had maybe a couple of games, Monday, Wednesdays. But now you're going to have virtually games every night, and they're taking a page out of the NFL playbook. You're going to have I think the Amazon game will be Thursday night. NBC's looking to replace their Sunday night game of NFL with NBA product. ESPN's going to be looking at, having more specific nights. So I looked at the rates are going to be games every night of the week, not in counting your local, stations. And again, what's happening now in that local deal, like in my old world, the artist formerly known as Fox Sports Southwest, they're probably not going to have as many local games to telecast as they used to, as these games now are all being loaded up into that national economic system. And then maybe that's a good thing for the NBA right now, because the RSN world is certainly going through its issues right now in terms of bankruptcy issues that are out there. And those teams are trying to figure out how they're going to replace lost revenue, particularly my friends at the Major League Baseball level. And so, I just think, again, for the NBA, timing, again, is so important on these things. And they were able to sort of take advantage of, again, the globalization, what's happening in the local market, the growth of the streamers right now. And again, relatively a long-term deal. What was it? 7 years, right? No, 11 years, right? For $76 billion.
7 years.
So most teams aren't going to want to, if you got a 5-year deal now, I would call that long-term. For them to go out at 11 years, certainly gives them some stability.
That was surprising.
And that was a big deal. And there are probably some openers in it too. We just haven't heard about, that in, 7 to 8 years, if certain things happen in the marketplace. But again, I think they really took advantage of the marketplace, of the situation, played their cards very, very well, and, and got a straight flush.
You always have to have at least one outside bidder, right? There were 2 this time, NBC and Amazon. John, the deal before this one, Fox wanted to get into the NBA. That drove up ESPN and Turner at the time. If it were just ESPN and Turner this time around, I don't think they get that kind of money. But when you have that interested outsider, which goes back to what Dr. Loftin was referring to, in the college level, does that affect the rights going up? Here's the other thing. Sports is programming. That started a long time ago. It's not scripted. There's that type of thing. John, I remember when Turner first did the Thursday night game, and we all looked at one another and said, what are they thinking? That's never going to work, because it was very much a weekend. You stayed away from Monday nights because of Monday Night Football. It ended up being brilliant. TNT carved out Thursday night. Then they carved out Tuesday night in that players league type night where they had the players right there. It's just fascinating. But you always have to have an outside interest that will drive the dollars up.
Yeah, it's all part of the timing and the marketplace. And when you get both in your favor, you're going to do pretty well, which is what the NBA's done on this process. So, and the fact that, again, that I think people are going to look back at Turner and again, they're still, trying to do this matching opportunity out there. I don't know if that's going to work at the end of the day, but they had a chance to do it and they thought it got too rich. And look how quickly they wish they said it. They probably said yes to that deal when they had their exclusive negotiating window.
It reminds me of CBS and the NFL.
Yeah,
CBS
exactly right. Back in
right.
Fox's days, when Fox came in, and that revolutionized that process, and we wouldn't be talking about where we are today if Fox wasn't one of the players that were, that's very interested in continuing to support the sports ecosystem.
Which forced CBS 5 years later to overpay for the AFC, right?
Yeah.
And NBC was out.
My late father always said to me, son, if you have a dog eating poorly, get a second dog. And that reflects this. You're talking about competition drives it. And you said it very well, Andrew. You said it very well, John. that having these extra bidders in there just drives the price up. So that's what I see happening in some respects in the college world today. When you begin to see these conferences juggling around, you see Yarmack doing what he's doing right now. It's trying to create this kind of sense of competition out there. And if you don't act, you don't meet my terms, this other guy's over here waiting to jump in. And so you begin to get that kind of competition there between 2 or 3 different entities trying to get the price driven up there. That's been successful for a very long time in the marketing world, and I'm not surprised to see it right here. So I see models of what's going on in the NBA developing the context of what we're going to see in college sports in some respects, not totally, because it can't be the same. But as we move towards a professional model for college sports, guys, it's going to have to happen, because where's the money going to come from to pay those players and pay the players from the past? So we're talking about revenue becoming necessary to be increased again, just to keep us steady in a sense in terms of who plays for us. And it's got to be coming from someplace. And I see these kinds of opportunities to break up sports individually, like basketball versus football, to be able to get a better deal overall for your conference. And I see the trickle down from these very big deals, like women's soccer even, which is a big deal for their level, trickling down to the college level ultimately. Basketball clearly is going to be connected to what NBA, because there's a strong connection there between those two, given how players move around. Back to your point, John, a question for you here. You talked about the internationalization of pro sports. I see that continuing to happen a little more each year at the college level too, in basketball in particular. I see a number of players coming over from Europe, especially, and a few other places, to play basketball here that are not U.S. born, and that's exactly what the NBA's been doing for years. So I see that model, showing up in the college world, which has been around the NBA world for a while.
Well, and again, since we're talking Big 12 Media Days and it's fresh in everyone's minds, I think, again, part of what they were looking at was this Mexico series, that they wanted to try to bring more games down there and internationalize the sport, probably more so for football than basketball at that standpoint. But I do think, again, the other thing that caught me that we haven't talked a lot about yet was that Yormark said, and we're looking at creating additional windows, which probably was talking about football, because they have so many teams now. And not that they're saying they're going to be the MACtion where there's no games in October on a Saturday. But I do think, again, if any conference has got the will, the ability to move some games around into some other windows, you'll probably see the Big 12 be very aggressive in that space too. So I think that's something that, again, with all those teams, you can't play them all on Saturdays for football. So I think, again, they have the luxury of having a deep bench that's going to allow them to move games into other windows, which their television partners are going to be pushing them for and paying them for, more importantly.
Well, will the time zones play a role here for like the Big Ten? I mean, when you got 4 time zones to deal with, is there a value in trying to divide up your content across more than one day or more than one weekend to be able to deal better with the time zone issue?
Well, one of the things in the television industry that's important to is they call day parts. How do you program all the various day parts? All right. And depending where you are, you're a day part. If you're on the East Coast and it's a West Coast game, you're going to be in late night day part on the East Coast, but that's prime time on the West Coast. So if they can leverage those different day parts to do, to get the right audience in there and draw and schedule appropriately, they're going to help. It's going to drive the process. I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes we've devalued the West Coast, marketplace for a variety of reasons. They don't have the avid fan base that the SEC does. They don't have the fan base that, Michigan and Ohio State do, but they still play some pretty good sports out there. And again, in LA in prime time, people stop and watch. They're home from the beach. Again, there's so much of a lifestyle issue out in LA, which really hurt the NFL back in the day, because by 9 a.m. your first game was on, by 1 o'clock your second game was on. And that's part of the reason that the audience numbers were so low out there, because the lifestyle was so positive. If you're living in Chicago, in New York and Minnesota, you're inside watching, and if you're dying to watch anything live. So I think sometimes they get a bad rap for that. But I think, again, those day parts are still pretty important out there. And I think particularly that West Coast audience, that late night East Coast, primetime West Coast, they'll be able to find some ways to take advantage of that.
I think one of the effects of that, not just on the TV side, but there are so many California kids, whether it's baseball, football, are playing in the SEC and the Big Ten. They have moved out of California. John, I think that's a part of that, is they get to be seen from the old 2:30 CBS game to big noon kickoffs, things like that, there's been almost an exodus. It's always been a talent-rich state, always. And then Oregon went in there. And then there's a reason why Utah was good. They got in there. Now there's been even more of an exodus, especially for baseball, because these kids all want to play in the SEC. That's where they feel like they can be seen. And that's a little bit of the residue of the TV windows, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all tied in together, because these kids now are growing up and watching Alabama play. And if you're Tua Tagovailoa or DJ, I can always butcher his name, but they've decided to not play at home, to go out there and where the competition's better, because they are going to get the, playing against, what's going to help them get to that next level quicker with the coaching and the level of competition. So, I think the best players want to play against the best usually. And so I think, again, that's where the Big Ten and SEC continue to have that extra carrot out there, because, to your point too, in baseball right now, the SEC, if you're a great baseball player, no matter where you are in the country, your first choice is going to be what SEC teams are knocking on my door.
That's exactly what you're doing. And we have seen that. And because baseball was in the news for the last couple of weeks, Dr. Loftin, NIL has been probably as much of a boon for baseball as any sport, obviously not the only one. And the dollars that are now being kicked around, we touched on this a little bit in our last episode about baseball teams were normally money losers in college, but with stadiums and what you can do, there's the opportunity now for some of these baseball teams to be making some money. But the dollars now in college baseball, and I think because of the eyeballs in the last couple of weeks, really has its attention on that sport.
Well, when my season ticket renewals come up for baseball, I expect to see a slight increase, shall we say. I think that two things are in play here. The House decision we talked about a couple of times already, especially about 3 weeks back. That decision is driving a cap level towards how much you can compensate players for in a college. But that does not count NIL. So we're seeing NIL as a lever on top of that to give schools an advantage over others by adding to their $21 million cap, maybe $15 million or more from NIL sources to be able to do that. That doesn't apply to football, applies to anything. I think that Texas A&M is an example here of what I've seen transpire just in the last few weeks when their coach bolted to Texas. There was a lot of reaction to that. We all heard that, guys. But what I'm seeing in reality here is people stepping up and saying, well, I want this player to here. I want this player to stay here. What will it take? And so I'm seeing people who can write those checks, beginning to think not just about football, but about baseball as well in terms of what they're willing to pay. These baseballers are getting under $10,000 a year at Texas A&M, as far as I could tell from NIL. I think it's going to go up significantly looking at next year. And that's an effect of two things: an effect of what's transpired between two competing schools trying to get an advantage over the other, but then a window of opportunity based on a settlement of a major lawsuit against the NCAA, which is going to, I think, open the door for NIL to be a very big part of the calculus of what we do in terms of paying players for playing, for paying players for playing. That's what's going to happen right now. I appreciate your comments about it, guys.
Well, I think it's only going to drive up. I mean, that's just driving up the cost of poker right now. If I think for the sports, as I thought I saw something on the House report that they said that they kind of already determined what the back pay for student athletes was, and I think a baseball play was part of that 5% under others receiving votes. So you're not seeing that there, but to what we're talking about paying baseball players today is probably pushing that level up to what your basketball numbers are, if not more. And so, I mean, now your cost of fielding a baseball program is getting significant. Using the Big Ten example or the Big 12 example, all right? Who's got the best baseball in the college baseball right now? I don't think anybody would say an argument it's not the SEC. They're getting the same money as everybody else is out on that thing from from the SEC network, big network standpoint. If you're Brett Yormark, you're thinking about how do I take this baseball mix out there and go do something special with it, because it is the best college baseball in all the land. So will they do that? Doubtful. But those are the kinds of things that you've got to be looking at through this process, because again, what you're doing for baseball right now are almost making it unsustainable for the programs there to make revenue into that model right now. And so again, just like the old thing when a new TV deal would come in, who got most of the value from the leagues? It was the players. And once that starts happening in sports, at the collegiate sports, I'm not saying the players shouldn't get paid. They obviously should, but you've got to be able to manage that in a way that's, again, creates the whole ecosystem to allow to stand on its own. And that's where I think, again, if left without checks and balances, it starts to get unsustainable again.
I think the
John
11.7
is right.
No, I was going to say the 11.7 in the scholarships. I think a lot of people are misguided. They think that every baseball player gets a scholarship.
Yeah.
You divide 11.7 into basically 35.
Yeah.
So that's why some guys are going to walk on. Some guys are going to get a third. There are some guys who are going to get one. That's what I have to do. This is also the awkward period. Scholarships had to be set on July 1. You still had a transfer portal, and you don't have a draft until Sunday, July 14th.
Yeah.
So here's a 2-week window where you're hoping that, again, big difference. You can sign a kid. Can you get him on campus? But you've had to allot the 11.7 by now. You have no idea. Your roster's not set for next year. I think that's where I say it's kind of an equalizer for the NIL for, hey, I may not have a scholarship for you, but here's some money for you to come to this school. And that's for every school out there.
That's again where Vanderbilt, who obviously they're never going to be a competitor on the football playing field for championships, but they can in baseball because they can divert probably more of their money away from football into baseball to create NIL opportunities that would rival them what an A&M or Texas can pay behind these players. So that's where schools will make that kind of choice. We're going to sacrifice one sport if we can become, a championship contender and a potentially an Olympic sport, or it's hard to call them non-revenue sports anymore. But in that world,
yeah,
we're seeing a lot of that action right now. I mean, look, Oklahoma with softball and Nebraska with volleyball. We're seeing teams look at a specific, or whether schools look at a specific team and saying we're going to make that very successful, and they find the donor community that will back that up with NIL money. Now, if we move one step ahead, guys, and look at the very likely potential for players to become employees and be able to negotiate collectively, then you begin to see other dynamics coming into the picture here. Contracts then become part of the conversation, and a contract may manage some of these issues with the portal and things like that. Because if you sign a contract for $1 million as a quarterback, agree to play for the school for 3 years or 4 years, and then you want to go, well, there's going to be penalties associated with that in that contract, I'm sure. So I think the players are they're asking for this, but I think they're going to find it interesting to find themselves like a pro governed with a contract as their primary vehicle, as opposed to these NCAA rules that govern how people move around within a sport. What do you think about it, guys?
Depending on what the contract is, some leagues, think of baseball, they've actually made that first contract longer. So you are property of that team for 5 years. And Major League Baseball manipulates that contract. That's why so many prospects come up in May 1 and not in April, because the clock starts and they get a year of service. If it's in April, in May 1, that service goes to the next year. The NBA tried that with the first contract longer. They actually cut it down to a shorter contract. But to that point, it's usually 4 years in the pro teams that you are, I hate using this word, indentured, but you are. So many minor league players could not get out of their deal. They were done. So they would ask for a trade. It may not be done by the Cubs or the Twins, the two organizations that I work with. They were at the mercy. So if you were a first baseman with the Cubs at that time, guess what? Mike Grace ain't leaving first base. You had to go to you had to learn another position, or you had to be traded to another franchise. That's why they were so excited at the trading deadline when they would see all the scouts. It's a possibility they could get out. If not, they didn't become free agents for 5 or at a time, 6 years in that contract. And that's what you're talking about, free agency and then seeing. Sometimes after 5 or 6 years, they weren't wanted any longer because there were 5, 6 drafts of young players still coming in for all of that. It will be fascinating how that contracts will be. Now, what we've seen from judges, Dr. Loftin, as when it comes to the transfer, where it's now unlimited, we'll see if they can hold on to a contract, or do they find a friendly judge for something like that? But it's a game changer now. I've always said this, return of investment when it comes to NIL. And now if there's a contract, Will they be wanting to break it? Will it be easy? Will there be clauses in there? I don't know. John, I took up too much time on that one.
No, but Andrew, you're asking all the right questions, and I think no one has those answers yet. But I think what college athletics has a chance to do is look at what's worked and what hasn't worked, seeing all these different types of things. Again, it's not apples to oranges. It's probably more, oranges to tangerines in this process. So there are a lot of things I think that the college could do to say, let's take the best of the sports. I mean, even in the most recent NCAA, they're talking about the modernization of today's college athletics. Okay. So modernization probably means professionalization. So how do you start to figure out what all that looks like? Okay. And if this is the world we're going to play in, how do we take the best of all these different areas to create a infrastructure that answers these kind of questions so this stuff doesn't happen? Contracts probably should be part of it. You should have more, there should be more, abilities, there should be able to move, but if they do move, there needs to be some types of penalties or a process to do that. So I think, again, if the leagues now can kind of sit back and say, look, it's inevitable. How do we learn from this? We've seen these other leagues all kind of morph over years. How do we take the best practices of those and tailor it to best fit what's going to happen in college athletics here in the foreseeable future?
For the
And
longest
again,
time,
guys, looking at the issue of trickle down, you mentioned it a moment ago, minor league baseball. We've seen just in the last few months a large fraction of minor league baseball teams being bought up by private equity. Well, those guys go return on money. So how they're going to manage that? How they're going to get it done? They're going to tighten down some of these contractual issues here to make sure they got the best players and keep them long enough. And again, it's going to become a model potentially for college sports as we see this shake out with private equity moving in a major way into minor league baseball, that glue between college and professional MLB. Think about it, guys.
Diamond Baseball Holdings is that group. They now own a quarter of the minor league teams. You have to go back to 2020 because that's when Rob Manfred called it one baseball. Major League Baseball then told minor league which cities in minor league baseball who was going to play AAA, AA, single A. No longer did you have the long-term cities in minor league baseball. Some of them lost their teams. Case in point, Houston going to Sugarland. The old Skeeters were they weren't affiliated with anybody. They were unaffiliated in the old Atlantic League, but now they became the Space Cowboys. St. Paul Saints were an independent team. They went to the Twins. Major League Baseball assigned. San Antonio lost a AAA team and went back to the Texas League in the AA. That was Rob Manfred doing that. So there are fewer teams. They got rid of the lower levels and made them independent or collegiate wood bat leagues. Fewer teams, fewer rounds now in the draft. So on Sunday, there will be 20 rounds, not 50 like it was in the past. So to your point, Dr. Loftin, these teams now want more finished products. It used to be, as I told you last episode, you couldn't wait to get your hand on an 18-year-old if you were a pro league. You wanted them to pitch in your system and how you guys pitched. You didn't have to shake the college out of him or hitters where the bats were completely different. Now with the coaching, the talent, to play in the SEC and the ACC and the Big 12 for baseball and these coaches, you're more of a finished product. Where now at 21, you still have a career ahead of you because you've got 3 solid years of playing, where in the old days you would fight and say, no, 21, 22, we don't want anything to do with that guy if he doesn't advance quickly enough. So it's dovetail. I don't think the TV part does it. Diamond Baseball Holdings, they can consolidate, a lot of things for a core of those teams. But I think pros are much more receptive now to college players because the talent coming out, you can send a kid now a lot quicker to AA if he's coming out of the SEC, the Big 12 or the ACC, because he's had that level of competition, not for just 1 year, but for 3 years.
So do you know who the starting pitcher for the National League is for the All-Star game on Tuesday?
Could it be that kid from LSU, Paul Skeens, who started at Air Force?
Yeah. So again, it goes back to your point that these guys, they're jumping right to the big leagues. They don't have to go to the minor leagues. The SEC is that good right now. And that's what we talked about in one of the earlier podcasts too, is okay, well, how does now the MLB start to try to help and put some of their resources in to make sure that these kids, when they're not going through their minor league systems, you're working with the conferences or individual schools to make sure that those players are still getting the appropriate nutrition and training and all the other guidelines out there that they would be getting if they were a high-end draft pick in their minor league systems.
I mean, that's now what coaches are telling to these high school kids. Again, if you're
Yeah.
first or second round, you go. That's life-changing money. And a first or second rounder in minor league is on a fast track to the major leagues. But if you're not, you know what? Spend the next 3 years at any of the SEC schools.
Yeah.
John, to your point, you're going to eat better, train better, play better. The facilities are better. You think there's a pro development center in Kannapolis? No, there's just not. That's not the way it is. Now, you can go to the Florida and Arizona, whether it's long-term and for spring training, but you're not getting that. And again, it's finished products for that. It's fascinating the way it changed. The one change that I would make, the draft has to go back to there was the thought, what college baseball didn't like was we get to the College World Series and all we're talking about is this kid was just drafted and we're talking about he's not playing for Tennessee. He was drafted by the Orioles. I get some of that, where that shouldn't have been the main talking point and the narrative. But some years ago, that draft was supposed to take place on Monday before everybody got to Omaha. And then you played the College World Series. COVID hit. They moved it into part of Major League Baseball's All-Star Weekend. Again, it's that gap. If Major League Baseball will be relying so much on the college baseball prospects and products that are coming out, I wonder if they can work together to try to work on that draft. Again, because we're in that awkward window right now.
Yeah. So Andrew, you got a great point. Your Major League Baseball or your college, who do you talk to at college to try to say we need to work together on this? Where do you go?
Great question. You have to go to each of the leaders.
Yeah. And at what point in time, that's probably, that juice is not worth the squeeze at the end of the day. But if you could get that done, that would be a big probably plus to helping, work in a better collaborative way with these pros. Because again, in essence, we are becoming another minor league system for them.
And that's been true for football,
Yeah.
for basketball, and women's basketball for the WNBA. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's always been like that. And John, I remember being in San Antonio the year that David Stern, they went back to the 2 years in college. I think it was you had to play 2 years. We had a big announcement at the then AT&T Center that it was going to be 2 years. And now we fast forward, everything old is new again.
Yeah.
You can come out of high school, or it was the 1 year, and they're thinking about doing it back for high school. So yeah, they've kind of worked together, and at times it's been at odds for some of that. But we know that when you watch March Madness, men's or women's, because the WNBA draft is basically right after the final horn sounds when they crown a champion in women's basketball. Same thing with the NBA. You've just watched all of these players for the most part play, and then you go into the draft. They are hand in hand, but they don't always work hand in hand, if that makes sense.
But again, in a perfect world, hopefully we'll see more of that because of the dynamics that are changing in that world. Basketball is a little bit different because of the international players, et cetera. But if you're baseball, this is your lifeblood. These guys that you're drafting, probably the first 5 picks are going to be, if they're not a high school kid, they're going to be SEC ball players.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Loftin, I wanted to ask you, how do presidents of colleges, are they affected by this new breed of conference commissioner or the head of commissioners? Tony Petitti at the Big Ten doesn't come from an academic background. Same with Greg Sankey, although he's been around the SEC. And Brett Yormark, who's with the Palace of Detroit, worked for Cat Sports in New York and has that background. Is that at odds with presidents, or are college presidents, do they have an open mind for people like that?
Well, I think, again, look at the money. All right. I mean, this is becoming a more and more important part of what a college president or chancellor has to think about is how do I deal with my athletic program, especially if you're in one of these conferences, which is going to bear the brunt of the payments that are going to be dictated by the House settlement. So money becomes very important. Well, that leads you to think about, do I want a person who's come through that traditional route, has been maybe a player, been a coach, been an associate commissioner, been a commissioner, and maybe a group of 5 conference, then go to my Power X conference. That's kind of what you're thinking about in the past, but you might want somebody going back a while. The Pac-10 hired Larry Scott. That was quite controversial at the time. Larry Scott came out of the women's professional tennis world. Okay. What do you know about college sports? The answer was, nothing, but he wasn't hired to do that. He was hired to bring some new ideas into the equation. Yarmak's exactly the same kind of hire. So I've sat there. I was on the search committee of the SEC leadership when we went from saying goodbye to Mike Slive to welcoming Greg Sankey in there. And we had some interesting opportunities, I said. And I was one of the outliers in a way on that committee because I was interested in looking at a guy who I thought was bringing a very, very different background to the commissioner's job than what we had. What we ended up going with, I was okay with that. We went along and went with Sankey, which was a safe hire. He was part of the team. He'd been there a long time. He had been trained by Mike Slive. He had run a smaller conference before he came as associate commissioner of the SEC. So he was a safe hire. But I'm seeing this thing happening now. So you have a Yarmak, you had before a Larry Scott, who are different people. And I think that even though they won't win, Larry clearly didn't win. There's an opportunity here for new thinking and new ideas, and you take some risks when you do that, but your rewards might be extraordinary. And I think you, John, have talked to a lot of different kind of commissioner types over the years, and where they used to come from. I thought that Dan Beebe was a kind of an interesting choice, and I finally heard why he was picked for that particular job from David Boren when he was Oklahoma's president. But Dan Beebe was a rugby player basically, and where he came from. And all of a sudden became commissioner of the Big 12. And you can argue about success or failure there, but he was a different kind of commissioner in some respects. So I think now there's a willingness of these college presidents and chancellors to take a chance because what? They need more revenue to be able to feed this ever-growing maw of college athletics. And without having more revenue to be able to do that, how's it going to happen? The hiring of the new new AD at Texas A&M. He came out of a football background. He was a successful, one could argue about that, a successful commissioner elsewhere or the AD elsewhere. And so he came in as an AD at Texas A&M here. But his marching orders have clearly been about money. Everything I've seen him do has connected to money, hasn't it, John? I mean, you've seen that over and over again over the last many weeks he's been at Texas A&M. So much of his decision making has been tied to that. One of his first public announcements was layoffs within a very large department, and one with quite a lot of money in it, quite frankly. But he was told, I think, that you've got to straighten this thing out and make sure we are lean and mean, so we free up dollars to be able to handle the next step in the evolution of college sports.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, as you're dealing with these other issues, that's why collectives aren't going away, because they're going to be the ones that are going to funnel that extra revenue to the players in the SEC to help them get above and beyond whatever the agreed upon salary cap is.
I just want to say, I told you that my other podcast is going to be Unintended Consequences. If I start a second one, it's going to be Ever Growing Maw. Dr. Loftin, that's my favorite phrase from this episode. And it is so appropriate.
A couple of side notes here. I just think you'll find interesting, guys. I've been looking at this last couple of days, but Nick Saban, is now retired. But an interesting article in The Athletic came out just a day or so ago, and it talked about the fact that the butterfly effect, they call it. I call it, again, the consequences that you're talking about here. Nick Saban's departure as Alabama's head coach supposedly has affected 400 coaching jobs nationwide. So the ripple effect from his departure there of moving around different coaches to be able to make all the new pegs fit in the right holes, 400 coaching jobs were affected by the departure of one coach. Think about that a moment, guys.
Are they talking assistant coaches?
Yeah, probably.
Talking about
coaching,
that,
right?
The movements. Nick Lees, head coach coming here, vacancy here. All these vacancies and people jumping around back and forth. I mean, look at Texas A&M in Texas. Schlossnagle says, "I'm going with all my coaches." Well, guess what happened? Some came back. Okay, all my players, some came back. All right, all these things, this juggling around happens now when one thing takes place. It's not isolated. So the unintended consequences of these decisions come back oftentimes, and they may bite you. And that's what I think you're talking about, Andrew. These happen over and over again when you don't think about all the possible, fallout from a particular decision you're going to make. I don't think Texas thought half about what happened to them in terms of PR when they hired Schlossnagle like they did. And I don't think Schlossnagle thought when he said what he was getting into here.
I
mean,
personally don't think they
happen.
cared. I don't think they cared. They got their guy.
They got
I'm
their
serious
guy,
about
but at what cost? And
when have they ever cared about the cost?
Well,
they've never cared about that.
I don't mean money cost. I mean the cost.
No. Sark,
Schlossnagle promised.
What was Sark's reputation? What was Beard's reputation? They let Beard go. When have they cared about that? When did they care about Tom Herman? When they
I think
didn't
there's
get
issues
Nick
here in terms of I don't mean money here. I mean things like Schloss said, "I'm bringing my entire staff with me."
Right.
That didn't work out. Okay. I'm bringing all my good players with me. That didn't work out. That's what I'm talking about. That's the cost. It's not a monetary cost only, because Texas doesn't care about the money. I got that. I understand it perfectly. But I think they cared about the personnel. And all of a sudden, it's not exactly what they were told it's going to be. In fact, it's quite different right now. And we'll see how this plays out. I can't predict what's going to happen.
But look at the contract. They're actually paying the new head coach at Texas A&M for all intents and purposes because of the buyout.
And then some.
Right.
And then some.
And then some.
The other
for me,
thing,
I don't think they care about reputation and what outsiders think. They care about what
I agree. But I think they care about what they have. They got the guy they wanted, yes. But they also didn't get what that guy promised them. He promised them a full staff of seasoned coaches that worked with him. He promised them a lot of good new players to add to what Texas already had been recruiting at the bottom end. They've recruited a lot of good freshmen and sophomores in there now. And all of a sudden, the people they're going to augment that with aren't there. So I think that's what the cost to them has been. Not reputational, not financial, simply that we didn't get what we expected we'd get out of this deal. That's what I think is interesting right now. And I've heard from a few of my Texas deep pocket friends about this in the last couple of weeks anyway. One more thing I'll mention before we get off, guys, is Arch Manning. I was fascinated that Arch, who said a while back, I'm not going to get into the video game world. Okay, I'm not going to get into the computer game world with my name, but now he's there. So he backtracked completely, and he's now agreed to be part of College Football 25. Now the payment there is minuscule and inconsequential, but it's interesting. He said initially, "I'm not going to do this," and he even had a nice little PR thing with another Manning of note about it, and then all of a sudden the world changes, and he's back in the fold again. And he's going to be one of those players on College Football 25. So that just to me was fascinating. These kind of things happen all the time and keep me very, very much alive.
We didn't have things like this, we wouldn't have a show.
Well, one thing in closing that I think was a positive thing that we could talk about in the industry, and this is kind of is in our backyard. If you guys saw the news that Southwest Airlines has become an official travel partner of the SEC. And I think, again, Southwest Airlines has never done a lot of those types of things in the past. They've done sponsorships, but not to that level. But becoming a travel partner, they actually talked about having more flights now to take advantage of the particularly the part I read, say, between Austin and Atlanta for the Georgia-Texas series. They're going to be adding more flights to that to accommodate fans. And now if we could just get them to fly into College Station, that would be a wonderful thing. If we should get,
ain't going to happen, guys. That's exactly what they said. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be fun. That's what we expected when they heard the announcement. Well, it means all the SEC schools are going to get access to Southwest Airlines. No, Texas A&M won't. Now, admittedly, a drive to Austin, a drive to Houston is not too big a deal for us from College Station, but still, it was interesting that we were the only ones left out of that.
We can hope.
That's exactly right. It's fascinating, John, because you mentioned that they have been sponsors, but not to this level. It's quite an addition for the SEC, and it's quite a big move for Southwest Airlines.
Yeah. Now, again, it shows you the value of the sports and the conferences now as more and more people looking to professionalize it. NIL is going to help them on that front, using names and likeness of players. So So again, it goes back to our original topic when the show opened was these are the things that the P&E guys are looking around to say, look, we see there are opportunities here that have not been fully exploited, and how do we help you exploit those? And I think the conversation is always, and even the NFL now is looking to up their cap on what a P&E can own in terms of an NFL franchise. So they're all doing it, just a different model. But again, these guys aren't coming into the business if they don't think there's opportunities to be had, which leads you to believe there's still opportunities to be had in the collegiate space.
That's what I liked what you said, Dr. Loftin. They all keep an eye out on one another, and how does it apply to us? That's what I find, whether it's the TV deal, whether it's a sponsorship deal, and naming rights, things like that. They're all keeping their eyes on one another. Enjoy the rest of your time, guys, that you are away, and we will get back together another time. Always good seeing you. Thanks for doing this. Our thanks to Nick Savage. Our thanks to Richard Zane at TexAgs as well. For Dr. Loftin, for Jon Heidtke, I'm Andrew Monaco. collegesportsftm@gmail.com. That's how you can email us, and we will answer your questions until our next episode. So long, everybody.